Rounding. For some employers, they think it makes their lives easier. Others like it because it tends to eliminate overtime. But companies should beware. States like California are becoming less and less tolerant of rounding, especially if it isn't facially neutral or in the employee's favor. Recent court cases have helped make it an even more risky proposition. Let's take the case of Mr. Goof, a conscientious, hard-working employee who strives to please his boss. He does his best to arrive on time each day and tries to ensure his other punches are just as punctual. But sometimes life gets in the way. This causes Mr. Goof to arrive at the time clock at 8:08 a.m. To make up for it, he thinks to himself, "Well, I'll just work a few minutes later." And so he punches out at 5:07 p.m. When he gets his paycheck, though, "Hey, I only got paid for 7 hours and 45 minutes on Tuesday. What gives?" He makes his way to his boss, where, after a quick look at the time cards, he's told, "You punched in at 8:15 and out at 5. It's right." "But I was only a few minutes late, and I made up for it after 5.
"We got a 15-minute rounding policy. Now beat it."
Looks like it's going to be tomato soup and day-old bread for Mr. Goof tonight. Yes, he is the victim of the all-too-common practice of rounding, and the company has avoided having to pay for 15 minutes of work. This makes his boss very happy. In fact, I think he feels a song coming on.
Yes, I do. Round, round, got around. I like to round, yeah. Get around overtime. I get around. I got around. Round, round, I got around. Got around, round, I got around. I'm a cheap got around, round, I got around. Real good bread. Got around, I got around. I'm getting bugged by the laws. Gonna take a trip. I gotta find a new place where the state ain't hip. My buddies and me are getting real well known. Yeah, the labor boards know us, they won't leave us alone. I wanna round, I got around. To keep costs down, round, I got around. I'm a real cheap head. Got around, I got around. A cheap amount of bread. Got around, I got around. I got around. Round. Whoa. We always round by 8 cause it's an easy cheat. And we auto deduct meals so they'll stay in their seat. None of my guys get paid well cause it wouldn't be right for them to make a living wage to waste on Saturday night. I got around, I got around. To keep costs down, round, I got around. I'm a real cheap head. Got around, I got I'm around. Making real good bread. Got around, I got around. I got round, got around. I like to round, yeah. Got around, round, I got around. Got 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 round, I got around.
That was long
and painful.
I'll show you painful.
Hey, he's bullying me.
I'm sorry, that's a subject for another HR update. If I may continue. Once upon a time, employers could just pay an employee 8 straight hours every day. The owners held all the cards.
You got that right.
As I was saying, employees took what they were given, grateful just to have a job. Then, states like California realized how non-exempt employees were being used and abused. And so they started to pass laws to help. One major change was to require overtime after 8 hours of work in a day. Naturally, some employers tried to find ways around that. They started rounding the time clock's hours. At first, California and the country seemed to be okay with rounding, though some stipulations were made. The FLSA indicated that it must be used in such a manner that it will not result over a period of time in failure to compensate the employees properly for all the time they have actually worked. They also set the maximum rounding increment to 15 minutes.
What do you mean, rounding increment?
Well, there are multiple options for rounding increments. The most common are rounding to the 20th of an hour. The time clock is rounded down if someone punches in during the first 2.5 minutes, and up if they punch in during the other half of the 5-minute interval. For example, if they punch in at 9:02, the time clock would round down to 9 o'clock. At 9:03, it would round up to 9:05. Next, rounding to the 10th of an hour. This is similar to the 5-minute option, but it uses 6-minute increments with the split being at 3 minutes. And, like with your company, Mr. Goof, rounding to the quarter of an hour. It too is similar to the 5-minute option, but uses 15-minute increments, with the split being at 7.5 minutes. So, taking your situation as an example, you punched in at 8:08. Since it is more than 7.5 minutes, it would round to the next 15-minute interval, or 8:15. And since you punched out at 5:07, it would round back to the previous 15-minute interval, or 5 o'clock.
That doesn't sound fair.
In this case, it certainly looks that way. However, if we were to change both times by just 1 minute, a completely different situation occurs. Say you punched in at 8:07. The clock would have then rounded to 8 o'clock. And if you punched out at 5:08, it would have rounded to 8 hours and 15 minutes.
So I got cheated out of 30 minutes of time because of 2 minutes?
Well, yes. However, the expectation is that on the whole this will usually either work out to be equal or will work to your advantage. That, however, is not always the case.
That ain't what it says on the internet. It says rounding is legal.
While it is legal, for now anyway, proving that employees are being paid properly is harder than employers think, and can involve going back up to 3 years to determine what the employees actually worked versus what they were paid. Many times, no matter how neutral the rounding policy appears, it tends to favor the employer.
But the internet says.
Let me guess. Wikipedia?
That wiki guy is really smart. I get all my information there.
I'm not surprised. Anyway, there are instances where companies have won when it comes to rounding. For instance, in See's Candy Incorporated versus Superior Court from 2012, and AHMC Healthcare Incorporated versus Superior Court in 2018, California's courts have found in favor of rounding to the 10th and quarter of an hour, respectively. In both cases, they were able to show that overall the employees benefited from overcompensation.
See? Totally legit.
These tend to be the exception, and not the rule. And now things have gotten even more complex. In California, employees must receive a minimum of a 30-minute meal break for every 5 hours they work. This meal break must begin before the end of the 5th hour worked. If the company fails to provide the meal break by the end of the 5th hour, or if the meal break is less than 30 minutes, or both, the company is required to pay the employee a 1-hour meal penalty premium. As stated by the California Supreme Court, even a minor infringement of the meal period triggers the premium pay obligation.
They get an automatic 30-minute lunch, so we don't gotta worry about that. What's this got to do with rounding anyway?
I was getting to that. On February 21st, 2021, the California Supreme Court made a decision in the case of Donahue versus AMN Services. They determined that companies cannot round meal period punches. In other words, time must be kept to the minute for both the out and in punches. As stated by the court, records showing non-compliant meal periods raise a rebuttable presumption of meal period violations. AMN was using a 10-minute rounding method, but their system did not show or use pre-rounded times when it came to determining meal penalties. By rounding, it might appear that employees were no longer owed meal period penalties for short lunches or for taking meal periods after the 5th hour of work. So now, if a company wants to round in California, they can only round the first punch in for the day and the last punch out.
Fine, I'll do that then. How do I set it up?
Perhaps the safest way to make sure it's done right is to work with a PEO. Insperity's time and attendance can be set up to round the first and last punch, but then calculate the meal period to the minute. This, however, can be extremely confusing for the employees. And if the first punch is rounded, it could potentially cause an issue with the meal not being taken by the actual end of the fifth hour of work. In the end, not rounding any punch makes much more sense, and is yet another way to keep yourself out of court.
What's Insperity gonna do if I still want to round?
Being the smart cookies they are, their HR specialists will advise against it, and then let you know that it would become your responsibility to produce complete and accurate time records if you were required to do so. They may also remind you that most employees find rounding unfair, even if it can sometimes work in their favor. On top of that, they might point out that you'll need to watch out for those employees who figure out the rounding rules and then purposely punch in and out in a way that ensures they are always rounded so that they get overtime. And undoubtedly, Insperity will recommend you speak with outside counsel to be sure you fully understand the risks of rounding, and so that you can be guided toward a plan that offers the least amount of potential liability.
And if I still want it?
At that point, they will send you an email reiterating Insperity's advice not to round. For example, Dear Pete, as the configuration of time and attendance electronic timekeeping system is completed, this is to confirm our discussion on July 1st, 2021 regarding rounding rules. As discussed, we have strongly recommended that you capture punches to the minute in the timekeeping system. After discussing the reasons for our recommendation with you, you have chosen to have the system configured without following our best practice recommendations. Since we will be configuring time and attendance as you have requested, it is important that you inform all employees of this practice and ensure that all work is accurately recorded, and so on. Following this, their time and attendance will set it up for you as requested.
Darn tootin'. But maybe this ain't worth all the hassle. Maybe I'll just pay it a minute.
Hey, that's swell.
Yes, that is swell. With the recent AMN decision, other court cases involving rounding will become even more important in determining rounding's fate. Another item which might eventually factor into rounding cases is the issue of the de minimis rule. In the 2018 Troster versus Starbucks Corporation case, it was decided that the national FLSA rule of not having to pay for off-the-clock time that is too minor or trivial to take into account does not necessarily apply in California. Could this, then, be applied to the issue of rounding? And a case be made that taking away a few minutes here and there violates California's rule against de minimis? It seems extremely likely that at some point in the near future, rounding may be entirely illegal in California, which will then lead to companies scrambling to comply. It's better to make the change now.
Yeah, I guess.
Does this mean I get my 15 minutes back?
Don't push your luck. Now get back to work, Goof.
Hey, next payday I can afford hot dogs again.
Hot dogs? Maybe I need to think about lowering his pay rate again.